Hi, everybody. Dr. Nick here. I just finished recording another episode of The Hospitality Spirit. My guest today was Vince Anter. Vince is a certified sommelier and the founder and host of V is for Vino, the #1 rated wine show on Amazon Prime. While pursuing a rock and roll career as a guitarist and vocalist, Vince fell in love with wine while working at the bars and upscale restaurants that paid the bills. As he pursued further wine knowledge, he realized there was no place for the average Joe to learn about wine casually, nor a way for people to see where their wine came from, and thus V is for Vino was born. During our conversation today, we talked about a wide variety of topics, including how Vince got started with V is for Vino, his career, his experience as a student at DePaul University and how it benefited him as an entrepreneur, and finally, some of the challenges that he faces as an entrepreneur and host of V is for Vino. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome, everybody. Dr. Nicholas Thomas here with DePaul School of Hospitality Leadership. Today, we are recording another episode of The Hospitality Spirit, and I am joined with Vince Anter. Vince is a certified sommelier and founder of the host of V is for Vino. Vince, nice to have you on The Hospitality Spirit today.
Thanks, Nick. I'm excited.
So, Vince, I've over the last couple of weeks since you and I first met, I've had a chance to do an incredibly deep dive into V is for Vino. This is without a doubt one of the best wine shows that I've seen on TV, reminiscent of some of the great travel food and beverage shows that we've seen in the past. Tell us a little bit about, for those that maybe aren't familiar with V is for Vino, a little bit about the show.
Yeah, 100%. Well, first off, obviously, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm excited to chat a little bit about the show and everything. So I started the show back in, I don't know, 2016 or so, was kind of when I had the idea for it. And, I had gone and taken my certified sommelier exam. And it was something that I didn't mind doing. It was a lot of studying and a lot of flashcards and a year of my life I won't get back, but I didn't mind it because I was in the industry. But as I was trying to learn and trying to understand wine, I realized that there really wasn't many video-based resources for wine. And the ones that did exist were almost strictly people in front of their webcams tasting through wines. They didn't combine the food, which is so important to wine, and they didn't combine the place, which is to me everything with wine. Wine is place. I mean, that's what you hear all the time when you learn wine, and it's tied to the culture. It's not just tied to the ground, but it's tied to everything around the wine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, all right, well, why is there no show that is doing this? Where is the Bourdain of wine? Where is the diners, drive-ins, and dives of wine? And there's a lot of reasons why there wasn't one, but I kind of decided that I could be the one to do it. And so that's what we do. In every episode, we go to a new wine region. You learn about the grapes that they typically make there. You get a little bit of history of the place. We obviously do a lot with the food. We're always going and pairing food with local chefs with the wine. You meet a winemaker who's there, and then there's a educational component as well, where we break down wine topics, because one of the things I found was that wine can be a bit, especially some of the vernacular and the words used can be a bit intimidating when you're first learning wine, and I wanted to take that out of it and make it super casual for people who don't want to necessarily work in the industry or get a degree in wine to understand wine and what they like and why they like it.
And it's interesting because these episodes are about 25 to 40 minutes in length. And I don't know if you've intentionally done it, but it appears that you almost have a formula, if you will, for what the show should consist of. So you start out really identifying kind of geographically where you are. So if we take, let's say, the Sonoma County episode, you talk about kind of the topography, the layout. You've got these different AVAs. Then you always will go and you'll meet a local producer. And in the case of, let's say, Sonoma County, you talk to the farmer who's growing the grapes, raising the cows, talk about the role of sustainability. Then you kind of go into the food component of it. So are you intentionally doing that? If you are, what was the reasoning behind that as opposed to just doing wine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so there's always a bare bones skeleton. I mean, you're 100% right. Because when I started this, I can't tell you how many people, when I was telling them what I was planning and when I had my first edits before anybody saw it, and I said it was 30 minutes and now we're doing 40-minute episodes. Everybody, and I mean everybody, was like, no one's going to watch that. That's too long. And I said, you don't understand. You don't understand. And I almost, was like, am I making a mistake? Everybody
Hmm.
wanted, this is the era too when, all of these short form videos were just becoming super popular. Everyone's like, why don't you make like 2-minute videos? And I was like,
Hmm.
because I can't tell the story properly in that amount of time. And I don't want to dilute what I'm trying to tell. I want to do a deep dive into a region. And, I kind of had to just be like, I don't care what you guys think and stick to my guns.
Yeah.
But I was nervous that that was going to be a problem, right?
So,
And it turns out that it worked out how I thought it would work out, which is this deep dive of, you need to understand. It's like you're laying the foundation of a house. I can't talk about what grapes are there until you learn about the history of the region.
mhm,
So we always talk about the history first, the grapes second, um, the wine topics that relate around that. So, for instance, I try not to just make the wine topic random. If we're in an area that is for instance, in Paso Robles, one of the things they have is very strong diurnal shifts, which are from daytime to nighttime, huge temperature fluctuations. And
mhm.
so that's a topic we talk about in Paso Robles. So, yes, it's a wine topic. It can apply to a lot of regions, but I try and make it relevant to the place we're in. And then the restaurant always was a thing that from the beginning I was like, we have to pair it with food. Wine and food, that's the whole point to me. So people a lot of times will say, what do you like to pair your dishes with? And I actually go to the reverse. I start with my wine and then I say, what am I going to cook tonight? So to me, I'm looking for a pairing in the
Mhm.
episode. And then I fill in the rest of the culture things as I can. I didn't get to do that in season one because it was our first season. But in season two, I was like, what else is important to these regions? Is it
Mhm.
agriculture? Is it, um, you know, sustainability? Um, we did one this season where, we're talking about just the downtown region of some of these cities that are close by. And so then I start filling in the blanks with those other places.
Yeah, I noticed that in the Portland episode that, when you did the Willamette Valley, it for that one, it felt it really had the, first and foremost, it was a wine show, but then very quickly it almost had the transition and the feel of a travel show. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
And
I mean, that's just, and we kind of saw the same one when you went to Italy, just because you went to so many different places. But I really noticed that in the Portland episode, it felt like almost just a really great publicity for tourism in general in the Portland, and then heading down to the Willamette Valley.
Yeah, and I find that that helps everybody. Obviously, that helps them from a tourism perspective, but it helps people get a context for where these places are. And the fact that the Oregon wine country is only a 40-minute drive from Portland.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, in my mind now, if I haven't been to this part of the country, and I didn't really know this until I really dove into research, it's like, oh, if I'm in Portland, I can take a day trip over there.
Sure.
If I come up for a weekend, and it's the same thing with what we just did in our Mexico episode. If you go to Ensenada, or if you're in San Diego for that matter, you're only an hour and a half. And
Hmm.
if I just said, "Oh, there's a wine region in Mexico, the Valle de Guadalupe," you that doesn't mean anything to you as to where it is. But if I put it in context of, "Oh, it's this far from San Diego," all of a sudden it's a thing that's accessible.
Exactly. One of the things when I was watching, to your point about how in each episode you're really looking at a different region, but one of the things about wine in a particular region that is always it's always very overwhelming. So if you go to Napa, let's say for a couple days, you're thinking about in your mind, okay, what wineries do I want to see? Like, what are the most quintessential wineries that I'm gonna that in the limited time that I have, if I'm gonna do 5 or 6 tastings a day, what what's the barometer that you use to help identify what's the winery that you're going to go to? Because it's not always the largest. Sometimes it's a very kind of boutique and bespoke winery, and the same thing with the food and beverage choice. What really is your criterion, or what do you use to decide that this particular winery is going to be a really good fit for this episode?
Sure. Well, just generally too. I mean, to answer that more generally, of if you're looking to visit somewhere and you're trying to decide where to go, take comfort in the fact knowing that in 2020 there's never been more high quality, well made wine on the planet.
Hmm.
With the way technology is now, and especially the way vineyard cleanliness standards are, there's completely like poorly made wine is hard to find. Now you're gonna
Hmm.
have stuff you like better than others. You're gonna have
Sure.
producers who make styles, but you have a good shot of finding fun things, and that's part of the fun. Don't stress over where you're gonna go, because the reality is part of the fun is stumbling in and making that assessment yourself,
Sure.
and then also getting lost. I mean, it's harder to do in a place like Napa now, where it's a little more built up and you need reservations. But if you're in smaller wine regions, stumbling into a place that you just happen to see that looks interesting, and finding those surprises, that's the most fun.
And that kind of
Uh,
goes along the lines of what we talk about in a lot of our courses here at DePaul. And when we talk about the entire servicescape and the entire experience, that the wine might be really good, but the places that you've chosen also are a beautiful setting. It's incredibly hospitable staff. The food is great. There's a aspect of social responsibility to the ones that you choose, which I really like as a part of the episodes.
You know what I've found though is that is almost, I'm finding less, that's almost becoming an anomaly not to have some sort of sustainability or social
Interesting.
mission, to really take pride in that. The more places I go to, the more people are touting that and are proud of that. So that seems to be kind of a thing that's, I thought, oh, like, oh, this winery is biodynamic, I'll talk
Mhm.
about that. And what you find, even when you look in France, a lot of wineries are organic or biodynamic, and they just don't even say it because they don't want to seem like they're coming off as trendy, because they've been doing that for
Interesting.
100 years. They just,
That, that's
so
really interesting. Kind of,
yeah, it is.
they've
It
always
is.
been doing it. It's in their roots.
Yeah, exactly. And you kind of mentioned, how we pick the wines for the episode. I always just, it's a combination of factors. Some of them are logistical, on my end, and then some of them are conceptual. I always want a certain price point, for each region, not only for my website, because I do sell the wines, but also from a, I don't think great wine has to be tremendously expensive. There's a few examples of places where, yeah, you need to spend $70 to get the right example of that wine.
Mhm.
But for the bulk of wine regions, anywhere in the 30 to 50 range, you can get some killer stuff.
That's great.
So I do have a price point that I look for. Most importantly, I need it to be a quintessential example of the place and the grapes that I'm talking about in the episode.
And we
As
really
much as
saw
they're
that.
making, go on.
You really saw that in the Italy episode. I mean, that was just quintessential, um, a quintessential example of how that wine and that grape is built into the entire fabric of the region and the society, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. And I could go to Napa and talk about Barbera, because they make Barbera somewhere in Napa, but we're talking about Cabin Napa.
Hmm.
And so that's not usually that hard to find, but I do want to make sure that it's a good, appropriate example of the style of wine that is very typical to the region. In wine terms, we always call that typicity, right? I want to
Hmm.
make sure it's exactly what the bulk of the wines will be if somebody gets a wine from that area that isn't maybe from that specific producer.
Sure.
I want them to have a similar experience, and Europe does a better job regulating that than we do in America. Um, and so that's a part of my decision. And then, I always obviously want people who have a story to tell, and who are able to have passion for what they do. And I try and focus on medium size wineries, medium to small, because I just think that there's some of the larger wineries don't need my help, and so they'll be
Sure.
fine without me. But I like to tell the story of some of the smaller guys. I mean, wait till you see the one in Mexico we did. That is, you walk in and it's the size, his entire production facility and tasting room and barrel room is the size of my apartment. I just think that's really amazing. And so
It
I
is.
try and find those gems.
It's such a great story. And one of the things that you really encourage people to do when they're watching the episodes is get a hold of the wine, whether they get it from you or they get it from their local distributor or purveyor, and to be sitting there trying the wine while they're watching the show. And there's just something about drinking the wine, watching how it's produced from the actual winemaker, eating some food that you recommend. I mean, there's this level of engagement and interaction, but we're all doing it virtually. So we're sitting in our couch on our couch at home, watching it or on our computer, and that level of engagement with it is something that I didn't necessarily see in shows previously. That you could almost play along, if you will, while you're watching it.
Yeah, that was my old pitch used to be it's diners, drive-ins, and dives. You could eat the food that he's eating on the show. I wanted to do the wine version of that. I think I wanted to take it one step further too. I mean, a lot of people are doing virtual tastings these days, but I guess I would call it, I don't know, virtual experience or virtual travel. That's kind of the goal. Because not everybody can get to these places,
Mhm.
and I get that. Though every state in America makes wine. So you're there wherever you are, there is a winery near you.
I think that's one of the things also that you know a lot of our courses here, we obviously teach wine management here at DePaul, and I know the faculty that are teaching the class have been using some of your episodes, and I really liked the fact that it's, to your point, it's opened people up to this idea that wine could be being made right there in your own state, that you might not live in Napa, or you might not live in Oregon in the Willamette Valley, but one of my favorite sparklings out there is made right here in Illinois. Um, it's a strange world. Um, Vince, I want to segue a little bit into your background. You are a graduate of DePaul University. Go Blue Demons! So it's always great to feature alums on the episodes. Um, Talk a little bit about your experience here at DePaul, what that was like, and some of the things that you take away that are benefiting you now as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so I came to DePaul. I wanted to be a music major. I was a percussionist, and I'd gotten in some places, some music schools, but I'd gotten into DePaul's academic school, but I didn't get into their music school, and I figured I'd try again. And I came as a freshman, and I just fell in love with the city. That was why I came to DePaul
Mhm.
initially. Was I just love Chicago, and I still do. I still think it's my favorite city in the country. Um, and then the second year came around and I auditioned again and I did not get in again. And so I kind of had a little bit of soul searching to do where I said, all right, what else do I want to do? And listen, it's competitive. It should be because music as a field is competitive, right?
Mhm.
They probably would have done a disservice by letting me in because as I learned eventually when I came out to LA to try and be a rock star, I was a good musician, but I wasn't a great musician. And in that field, you got to be great.
Sure.
It's like, and that's just a prerequisite. And then you need a lot of luck on top of it. And so I came to DePaul and I said, all right, well, what else can I do? And that's when I transferred to the CDM school because I'd always been good at technology. Um, and the opportunity I received there was something that was incredibly life changing, which was they were doing this program called Atlantis, which was a travel abroad program, but it was a 2-year program. So what happened was 6 students from DePaul, 6 students from Western Illinois, I think, 6 students from a school in France, and 6 students from a school in Sweden. So 24 of us in total all spent 2 years together. We all went to France for 6 months. We all went to Sweden for 6 months. And then all the European students came to America for a year.
Wow.
And yeah, and it was the one of the turning points of my life. And I remember sitting on the patio with my parents right before. I'm a young kid. I'm going into my junior year essentially. I had to make this decision in my sophomore year, and I remember freaking out that I was going to be gone for a year. I'd never done anything like that, and I was going to be across the country. I'd never left the country,
Mhm.
um, and I my parents luckily were incredibly supportive, and they not only supportive but pushed me to do it. They're like, you have to take this opportunity, you have to do it.
It's life
And
changing. Yeah.
yeah, and it literally changed the trajectory of my life because I learned so much. I had the one of the best years I've ever had in my life, and now that really just set that bug in me where I was like, I love this. I love travel. This has opened my eyes to things and places and people that I never would have got to experience otherwise. And so I went on this path where I said, whatever I do, whether I become a musician, whether I go into, I mean, I didn't know I was going to start Vias for Vino at the time, but whatever I do, I'm going to make sure that I'm continuing to travel and experience and see new things. And it was one of the greatest gifts that I could ever get. And I have DePaul to thank for that.
That's wonderful to hear. I mean, and we try to convey this exact story many times, and I'm glad you're talking about it. But it's a story that we hear over and over again, and I think many times when students are deciding should I study abroad or not, they go through and it might be a short term or a long term trip. They go through that exact same process that you do. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I've never been out of the state, or I've never been out of the country. I don't speak the language. The money's different. It's a 18-hour flight. The food's
What
going
if
to be
something
strange.
happens?
What if
You
something
were all of
happens?"
it. Yeah.
And they always think about the worst case scenarios, and my response to them is, listen, you're right, there are some differences, but those differences, you're able to overcome them, and you're able to learn from them. And I tell you, it makes you a much more, I mean, I train people to go into work in hospitality and tourism, and it makes you a better hospitality and tourism industry leader, because you can look at somebody that's just arrived from a foreign country into your hotel or into your restaurant, and you know exactly what they're going through because you've been through that exact same experience. That learning happens both in and outside the classroom, and being able to study abroad is probably without question one of the best things that you can do outside of the classroom, in addition to finding a great mentor, picking up a part-time or full-time job. But the ability to travel abroad and to have that international experience, without question, it's worth it. There's an incredibly high return on that investment of time and resources.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's invaluable because it really did change my life. And so, when I hope that all students, because I get that anxiety of, like you said, you're on the precipice of doing something really, really new to you, and at times scary, but it's just so worth it.
Do you think Vince, that do you classify yourself as an entrepreneur? Are you a filmmaker? Are you a first and foremost a wine aficionado that's trying? I mean, what do you classify yourself as? If you're at a dinner party, you're sharing a glass of wine with somebody, and they say, well, "What do you do?" What's your response to them?
Yeah, I mean, my just kind of always pocketed response is that I host and produce a wine show,
Mm,
which is kind of like a very oversimplification of what I do because I do see myself as an entrepreneur. Um, some days I feel like I'm more successful at it than others, as all entrepreneurs feel. But what I do, what I think surprises a lot of people, is how much of the show is done by yours truly.
hmm
You know, and I don't say that to brag. I say that to say that, like, listen, if you have an idea, you have to go for it because there's a reason why. I'll step back a bit.
hmm
So when I started the show, I looked at it and I said, "There's nobody here who can have this. There's no show like this. I don't know why it's not being made, but I have a unique set of skills where I can do it.
hmm
I have this IT degree, which means I can understand and do the film and the film editing, and I can come up with my creative vision. I can do the graphic design. I can do the sound editing because of my years being a musician. I have the wine knowledge because I went and served in restaurants for years, and I took my certified sommelier exam. And then I have the on-camera presence because I had been a musician. I tried to be a singer-songwriter out in Los Angeles, and so I was comfortable in front of the camera. I had this really weird, unique set of skills, and I was like, "Well, if nobody else is making the show, I think I can do it." And I wasn't sure I could do it. I wasn't sure if anybody was gonna care. I kind of felt it out the best I could. Like, "Hey, would you watch this? You know, would this be something that would be, you'd be interested in?" But just take the leap. If you think you have a set of skills that will benefit people and you have an idea, there's no harm if your pursuit and the intentions behind the pursuit of something are pure. It'll lead to something good.
Right.
It might change, your idea might change as you go, but for instance, I was going to start the show as a wine club that happened to have video. And then when I got
Mm.
into how challenging managing the wine club aspect would be because of wine shipping laws in America, and when
Yeah,
I
just the
showed people the
shipping alone
videos,
would be a headache.
yeah, exactly, and it is, and we can get in. That's a whole separate conversation about American wine laws. But the then I showed people some videos, and it ended up pivoting the idea. I mean, I didn't see myself as being, a travel food and TV host. It just kind of happened through the work. And like I said, I say none of this to kind of put myself on a pedestal, but just to say, like, go for your idea and don't be afraid of learning. I've learned so much about the process, both legal, business, creative, and I'm still learning every day.
What do you think when you start to look at? I mean, you're going into your third season, correct, of
Yes,
the
yeah,
show.
we're filming season 3 right now.
So, kind of reflecting back and now looking out. I mean, there's a there's not an infinite, but there's pretty close to an infinite number of wine countries and regions and grapes that you can explore. I mean, you can head down to South America, you can head over to Australia, you've got all of Europe. Really, the sky becomes the limit there. What do you, though, foresee as some of the big challenges on the horizon to give this thing legs to make it a sustainable model, kind of looking at season 8, 10, 12 out that far?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's changed is my revenue model from the beginning until now, and it'll change a bunch more times. And at first, I was worried because I didn't have one that I thought was long term sustainable. And I talked to Madeline Paquette, who is the founder of Wine Folly, and she told me the same thing about Wine Folly. She's like, "We change our revenue model a bunch, so don't be afraid if you don't have it figured out in year one or year two." Um, so that's a big challenge for me. It's finding out what's going to be the most long term sustainable. I'm currently, again, for I don't know, the 10th time trying to manage wine shipping in this country,
Hmm.
and sell the wines. And that is something that if I can get it handled is long term sustainable, but the laws make that challenging. Now
Sure.
that landscape is changing, which is a good thing. But it's going to take time. It's going to take a couple more years before I think you're able to ship retailers like me are able to ship to all the states that you want to be able to ship to.
Interesting.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah,
What about?
but that being said, um, there's that challenge. There's the challenge of every year I want to make the show bigger and better. And so it's like every episode I feel like even though I'm getting more efficient with how we film, I'm like, well, what else can we do? Can we add this in? Can I
Mhm.
add another person here to manage our sound and make our life better and get better sound quality? Can I, can we do more in this region? Can I make hour-long episodes? So I keep building it. So
Sure.
every time I have a handle, I'm like, oh, I have, a price point for each episode. I want to make them more expensive because I just want to make them better for the consumer. And so that's a challenge for me is continuing to produce great episodes and doing that consistently. And I'm always worried that distribution will change. I am on Amazon Prime, but it's a distribution agreement. It's not like I'm produced by Prime, and so
Mhm.
I have to manage that and make sure that I'm always able to be found and
Sure.
SEO and eyeballs. So there's a million and one factors. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is why we do it, right? If I stress myself out, very much so, but at the end of the day, I love this process and figuring everything out.
That's great. One of the things kind of, and I'm assuming it's probably tying a little bit back into your love of music and your background. One of the things that I really enjoy is the music that you choose for the different episodes. What's that process like in identifying artists that to work with? Because that's, while that maybe isn't the thing that people are going to notice the most, it absolutely is an integral component of each episode.
Well, and this comes from my music background for sure. I mean, it totally sets the vibe and the energy for the episode. And so I spend a lot of time choosing it, and I try and always choose local artists. So my first season, I think I did some artists from SoCal that I happen to know just because I
Hmm.
live here. But then for season 2, I went to some of the people who were helping me with the show and said, "Hey, who do you know? Give me a local artist in that area who I can feature on the episode." And I just did that for the Washington episode. I said, "Hey, who's from Walla Walla, Washington, that you think captures the vibe and energy of this part of the country, that I can maybe feature and put in the episodes?" So I always try and feature local artists, and I always try and pick things that set the tone for the style of the episode.
Hmm.
Some of them are more upbeat and fun. The Mexico episode I think is going to be very upbeat, fun, travel. Washington I think is a bit more rustic. You're kind of in the country. You're not really close to anything else besides the wine region. So it's different depending on which episode it is.
That's great. That's great. What when you also start thinking out about this upcoming season? So you just returned from Mexico this week. You've done Italy again. One of my favorite episodes. I still think about that wine cellar that you were in that episode. I can live vicariously through you about what I would want my own wine cellar to look like one day. What other sorts of, obviously, let's talk about a post COVID environment. I think we're all optimistic that we're going to get there. What are some of the international destinations? Clearly, I think France is on there for you. Are you looking at Germany? Are you looking at any particular South American country, Australia? What's on the horizon that you think would be on your list of must includes in a future Vias for Vino episode?
Yeah, all of them. I mean, I have
All the
and
above.
I'm in talks with all of them. Sometimes they come together, it's kind of a whoever comes together first. I do wanna make balanced seasons, so I don't wanna
Hmm.
do 5 episodes in France in 1 season, but I have about 10 episodes in France that I wanna do over the course of the life of the show. France is I always say it's the Beatles of the wine world, they
Hmm.
were the kind of the first to do it, and so they're super important to explore. Um, I am working my face off to make a Spain episode happen because Spain is my favorite, might be my favorite winemaking country, or at least one of them, and I haven't done a Spain episode yet.
Interesting. And the food there
Um,
will just be amazing. The pairing.
yeah, exactly. I'm talking to South America, to Chile and Argentina. I'm talking to New Zealand and Australia. COVID put a really, really tough gave us a tough card as far as travel. Not only the restrictions of travel, but talking to these people who are just uncertain what's going to happen, so they're not ready to commit to episodes yet.
Hmm.
So that's been tough, but I mean, it's all on the map. But if you gave me a couple that I personally want to do, there is Rioja, Spain, and Loire Valley, France. Those are like
Mm.
my top two that I'm trying to make happen that I think would be really incredible episodes.
Out of curiosity, I mean, you can kind of see it a little bit in the episodes, but I'm curious, what's the team that you usually travel with? I mean, is it people that you know that you've always worked with? Do you just subcontract out for each episode? Do you have a core group that always comes with you? I mean, how do you manage that process?
Yeah, for the team, our team is actually pretty small, and it's cool. It's guys that I met when I was starting this idea in bartending. The one guy who was a bar back with me was starting his film creative career, and we've kind of come up together. And he did the first season with me for, basically for peanuts. And I have to, thank him for that. I mean, we just said, "Hey, I have this idea. I know you do film. You want to try and make it happen together." And now we've been able to grow our careers. He's full time doing all sorts of projects. So they're not my full time crew. They do other things. I hire them for the episodes. But we've come up together, and it's a pretty small crew. It's usually me, my wife, who kind of acts as producer, and then 2 to 3 others. Camera one, camera two, and sound, and then maybe somebody to come along and help out, a PA of some sort.
Hmm.
And we keep it pretty lean, and it's a way for me as a uh, privately produced show to save and be lean, and because every person you add is extra travel costs, extra
Sure.
hotel, extra planes, and so we try and go as lean as possible. My guys do a really good job of doing a lot with a little. I think people think we have a much bigger budget and crew than we actually have.
That's the beauty of the episode, or that's the beauty of kind of your talent. That's the beauty of the episode is it definitely gives that impression, and that you're able to. I think it speaks volumes to one of the things that you've been able to be very successful at as an entrepreneur, being able to figure out what works. Because at the end of the day, uh, the costs associated with that, and because you're kind of self funded, that's a huge component of being a good entrepreneur.
Well, I also tell people that's the benefit of 2020. Like, if you can't get things done today, like, you're making
This is true.
excuses. You used to need a helicopter to get drone shots. Now you can get a $200 drone and get incredible shots. Um, you can learn how to do anything online. I learned how to edit from scratch. I edit the episodes, and I learned how to do that from scratch. I mean, there is no excuse in 2020 to not get things done, and because the information is out there and the technology is accessible. And I couldn't even look at distribution 10 years ago. Where would I have distributed this show if I'm
Sure.
not picked up by CNN or Food Network? It's not happening.
Hmm.
And so that just going back to that entrepreneurial spirit of like, if you have the idea, be confident you can execute in it.
That's great. Vince, you are a certified sommelier. You are a graduate of DePaul University. Uh, but more importantly, and incredibly impressively, you are the founder and host of V is for Vino, the number one rated wine show on Amazon Prime. Thanks for being a guest on the Hospitality Spirit.
Nick, thank you so much. This was incredible.
Seaweed, season after season. I got you if you got me, babe. I got you if you got me, babe. Yeah, I'll hit the dirt with you, darling.